Hello and thanks for joining me. Today I'm hiking on the magnificent Snowdonia peak of Moel Siabod. Now I parked up at Bryn Glo in Capel Curig and I've been walking for about an hour, so I'm not far from the quarry workings as I come up the eastern flank of the mountain. But as you can see probably over my shoulder, there's a lovely red smudge right across the skyline sitting over Betws y Coed. So I've set myself up and waiting for sunrise, see if I can get an interesting image. Now, unlike some of my previous excursions, I've got here early enough so that you can join me as I take my first images. I'm shooting straight down the valley. If ever there was a leading line, it starts right in front of the camera, this lovely gravel path that then appears to disappear into the valley all the way down to Betws y Coed, and the sun is coming up dead center in that composition. And not only that, I've got this lovely little bank of cloud that's just materialized right above where the sun's about to come up in about 10 minutes or so. But this is just magical. I've got the place to myself at the moment, which isn't going to last long. It's Easter Saturday. As you can tell by the way I'm dressed, I mean, it's about 15, 16 degrees already, and it's only 6 o'clock in the morning. So I suspect it's going to be quite busy up here later on, which is why, as photographers, when we get out at sunrise, it isn't always, the sun's just putting an appearance, need to get that shot. It isn't always just about getting the light, it's also about having the place to yourself. So, oh my goodness, that is stunning. Now I'm hoping a little bit later on that when it's been up maybe 10-15 minutes, it's going to throw some light up the path in the opposite direction and throw some light onto the mountain itself, and I'll just turn the camera around, point it up that way and get the sort of complementary shot. So the sun is about a third of it just coming up above the horizon. Spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. It's kind of interesting because when you're a landscape photographer, you're always thinking in terms of photography. You just can't help it. But it's important to remember just to enjoy where you are, the geology, the flora and fauna, and the light and the sky and everything about the place that you're in. Capturing it digitally is great, and then you can enjoy the memories and share your fabulous artworks, assuming they are fabulous, of course. But just to be here and witness this, an amazing sight, fantastic. I'm now shooting at 41mm. Once the sun came up, I realized I was too wide, and if I left it that wide, that I would lose the impact of the actual sunrise itself. And I'm actually going to zoom in and take it a little bit narrower as well. Let's get right in on it and get those layers in the image. Oh my goodness, that is stunning. What a morning. Time to turn the camera around and point it up at the mountain. Well, I don't mean to sound negative after that amazing sunrise, but part two hasn't quite gone to plan. As you can probably see over my shoulder, there's quite a bit of hazy cloud now, so it's kind of snuffing out the best of the light, and that means it isn't punching through and throwing anything up onto Moel Siabod, which is a pity, because immediately above the mountaintop, there's this great line of clouds sitting at a diagonal, which would be absolutely perfect if it could catch some light. And the composition is pretty straightforward. As you can see, I've got the camera up in portrait mode, and I've got this leading line of this really nice stone path straight up to the summit of the mountain. Looks great as a composition. What I also like is the fact that this year's vegetation hasn't started coming through yet, so I've got all the dead grasses from last year bordering the path, and that's much nicer than the sort of greens they're going to be in just a couple of months' time. So that's really good. It's not a terrible image, don't get me wrong, just would have been nice with that bit of sunlight. But not to worry, I've had worse mornings. Well, it's not often you can say that your composition has been ruined by a trout. But that's exactly what's happened here this morning. I've got up to the first of the couple of lakes that there are up in the valley just underneath the main ridge of the mountain. And the first of the lakes has got quite a good population of trout in it, because back in the day the quarrymen filled the lake with trout so they'd have something to eat. It's a beautiful glassy surface this morning, but there are trout rising, so that's not ideal for photography. And unfortunately, what I haven't done is brought my fly rod with me. Composition wise on this particular shot, I've got some really nice soft light still going on. I'm only about another 45 minutes up the mountain from when you saw me last, so it'll be quite harsh later on, but at the moment quite nice side light, although it's quite even, so no need for any filters. So I've got the lake in the foreground of my composition, but I also wanted some rock right immediately in front of the camera, and that's because the rock has got some really strong strata within it, leading you straight across the lake and up to Moel Siabod. Very easy from an exposure standpoint. I'm shooting at f7.1. I am going to focus stack it though. I've taken two, one focused on the rock right in front of the camera, another one on the main flank of the mountain. That should be plenty. And maybe at f7.1 I won't actually need those, but I like to be on the safe side. And the thing about focus is if you don't nail it, there's really not much you can do with it in post. If you have a problem with your exposure, there's often a remedy that can rescue an image, but focus, you're finished if it's soft. So I thought I'll just be on the safe side because I've got such close-up content in this particular composition. Another aspect of the composition is that even though I wanted to get the camera right down low, and as you can see I'm actually sat on the ground here behind it, it's lovely to sit on the grass up a mountain and not have a wet backside. Really nice. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that the reflection of the mountain isn't blocked off by the foreground, so it's really important to me that I got that balance right, and I kept the separation because it'll make it much easier on the eye. I'm right up at the top level of the quarry workings now, only about 600 or 700 feet below the summit. And I've still had the place all to myself. What I've come across is this absolutely fabulous quarry pool. There's lots of these to be found in the workings all over North Wales, and in fact in Mid Wales too. Where I grew up in Llandrindod, Wales, there was a quarry pool. A great big hole is mined out, and because they're mining slate, it's impervious, so it fills up with rainwater. And because it's such a tight, narrow little pond, and it's in this deep bowl, it's very still, and the reflections are absolutely spectacular. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and in about an hour's time it will be a terrible image because the sun will have moved around. There'll be no light on it at all. But right now the sun's in the perfect location to light bits of it up, other bits in deep shadow, and what that's doing is creating lots of contrast, and you've got this perfect reflection, and then just the final flank of the mountain before the summit. So I've got my camera in portrait mode, and I've taken a couple of exposures. I'm at f7.1. I do have a bit of foreground because I wanted to give us an indication of the scale of the pond. I've got the quarry face in front of me, and there's also a lone tree, but there's not enough contrast to pick it out, otherwise I'd do a tight shot of it. An absolutely glorious spot for a bit of breakfast and a sit down and take the weight off your shoulders. So yeah, I thought worth my while getting the camera out here for this one. Well, I'm up on the top plateau now, just under the final ridge to the summit. Behind me is Flynn of Oil, and this is a really good area for wild camping. So if you're looking for a quiet spot, quite flat, lots of well-drained grassy ground, this is a really good spot. And you're only about half an hour below the summit, so a good vantage point to get a sunrise or a sunset even up on the summit, and then come down and camp down here. So I'm going to be scaling this ridge. It's called Daear Ddu, which basically means black earth. It's a relatively easy scramble. It looks pretty dramatic, particularly in this light, and you can see how it got its name, but it's relatively straightforward. So don't worry, Mum, when you're watching this, I'm not going to fall off. Well, after a really long, hard scramble of about 800 feet, I'm now at 2,860 feet, right on the summit of Moel Siabod, and I got the place to myself on Easter Saturday. The views are spectacular. You can see everything right across from Moel Hebog, across the Snowdon Horseshoe, which, by the way, has actually still got some snow on the bulk between Garnedd and Snowdon Summit. And then across the Gliders, Tryfan and the Carneddau. What an amazing view. The position of this particular peak at the southern end of the main Snowdonia area gives you some great shots across to all the famous peaks, so it's a really good spot, and I'm willing to bet all those other peaks are absolutely crowded today. It was a really long, hard scramble actually. Not technically difficult, but hard going when you're pushing 60 years old, despite the fact, as you know, I pack as light as I can possibly get away with. So what I'm going to do now is have a very long pit stop, a bite to eat, maybe even a snooze, and then we'll see what we can do with some photography. It's not going to be brilliant because the light is absolutely blazing harsh, and everything in the distance is quite hazy. So I might see if I can get some detail shots, but I sort of don't care. I've got some great images already earlier on the way up. I'm sure there'll be something interesting on the way back down. For now, it's time to just take in this amazing view and just have a rest. So you're probably wondering what's going on. How come he's back in his yard? Let me explain. This vlog has turned out to be quite front-loaded. When I left the summit of Moel Siabod and started walking down, the light was really harsh and all the interesting things in the distance were really hazy. The close-up stuff would have been grass and boulders, so there was just absolutely nothing to photograph. With about half an hour to go before I got to the bottom, where I thought to myself, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll get a couple of shots of Afon Llygwy as it flows down through the valley, because there's some really nice falls. I got a text from Gareth Danks to say, I'm in Capel Siabod and the bacon's on. So I thought, well, I'd really like to meet Gareth, and I hadn't met him before. If you haven't heard of Gareth, where have you been? I really admire his photography, both his landscapes and his street stuff. And he's a really nice chap, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to go and say hello. After that, well, it was time to come home. And so I'm going to leave it there for this one. Sorry it was a bit abrupt ending, but what can you do? I had an absolutely amazing morning and really enjoyed the summit of the mountain, because even though there was no photography to be had, sometimes just sitting there and looking at the view, you know, that's enough. And who knows where I'll be next time and what images I'll capture next time. Anyway, thank you ever so much for coming along with me. I really appreciate it. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't done it yet, why not subscribe now and join me next time? Cheers.